The state visit of King Charles to the United States has been a diplomatic triumph on many levels this week. It's also proven to be an enormous distraction from the president's domestic woes, not least the fallout from the Iran war. The fragile but open-ended ceasefire is holding for now, and hostilities have duly paused in the so-called MAGA war too. It might not last for long. Oil prices surged again to $115 on Wednesday amid reports of an extended US blockade of the Hormuz Strait. And just as the White House was unveiling a rather kingly new passport with Donald Trump's face on it, the latest approval ratings dropped to reveal the president at a record low. All of this amid a furious debate about violent rhetoric and apparent right-wing hypocrisy on free speech. We've assembled a special panel to make sense of all this. An OG of the original MAGA movement, a disaffected member of the 2024 New Wave MAGA coalition, and a 2026 MAGA stalwart who's not giving an inch. So joining me now are the senior counsel of the Article 3 project, Will Chamberlain, host of Part of the Problem, Dave Smith, and the former Republican Svengali and Trump speechwriter, Buckley Carlson. Well, welcome to all three of you. Let me start, Dave Smith, just by a completely random question, which is, every single person that I'm now bumping into in New York City wants to talk to me about the Russell Brand failure to find his passage in the Bible. What do you make of it?
Both your and Megyn Kelly's interviews with Russell Brand left me just shocked and disturbed and kind of interested, but I don't quite know what to make of all of it.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way myself. Well, let's get into bigger stuff, which is Iran and the Iran war. Trump is, behaving like this war is pretty much over. And if it needs to take a bit longer to strangle the Iranians with the Strait of Hormuz and to keep the blockade going, he's got infinite patience. And then he suddenly out of nowhere, overnight posted a picture of himself with a machine gun, saying if you don't do a deal, effectively he's going to go bonkers with guns again, presumably involving more military action. Again, a lot of contrarian, conflicting messages coming out of the White House and the president in particular. What do you think, Dave Smith, is actually happening here with the Iran war?
Well, I think it's not good. And I think that we're, at this point, Trump is in between a rock and a hard place. And if you remember, Pierce, about 3 weeks ago, when Donald Trump gave his, he gave a speech after the markets had closed. This was shortly before some of the more unhinged tweets and threats. And he had been signaling then that, well, essentially, he was setting it up to say, hey, listen, we don't really need the strait. Other people's stuff flows through the strait, not ours. And then he said, it'll just naturally open up. It'll be a matter of time. And other people, other countries can. He was basically signaling that we can walk away from this with Iran still having control over the strait and who passes, and other people can work that out. I think the major problem there, and this is something that Marco Rubio just said in his interview yesterday, or excuse me, on Monday, that, well, actually, we can't walk away if the status quo is Iran gets to decide who comes in and who doesn't, and Iran gets to decide what currency they're trading in. Because, Pierce, if we do that, the reality is then this is a loss unlike any other loss in American foreign policy history. Even if you count Vietnam or Afghanistan or those as losses, I mean, we didn't transform them from a relegated, sanctioned, crippled country into a global power. And if you control 20% of the world's oil, then you are, by definition, a global power. And so now he's in this terrible situation where all he can do is blockade the blockade. The Pentagon has already told Congress it would take 6 months to open it up militarily, and that would be after the war is started, not with Iran attacking us. And so now we're at a point right now, Pierce, where we really don't know how catastrophic the damage that's already being done is. In these last 2 weeks, in the ceasefire, less has been traveling through the Strait of Hormuz than at any other point. As you know, Pierce, it's 20% of the global energy oil supply. We don't know how bad the effect of this is going to be down the road and how much more of this we can put up with. So we do have to end our own blockade, but then we go back to the status quo of Iran controlling it unless they're willing to capitulate, which every single indication is that they are not. And so not only are we not achieving any of the war aims, but we've got this whole new problem, which is the major problem now, which wasn't even an issue before the war started. I mean, this whole thing is just an indefensible nightmare.
Well, one person who is defending it very aggressively is you, Will Chamberlain. You tweeted on April the 17th, or posted on X, we're getting the enriched uranium, we're getting a stop to enrichment, we're getting an end to the funding of proxies, we destroyed the Air Force, Navy, air defences, defence industrial base and civilian leadership, all done in 6 weeks, geopolitical masterstroke. The only problem with that is I don't think the Iranians have got the memo about any of that, because from where I look, They've still got the enriched uranium. They've made no pledge to give it up. They don't even want to talk about nuclear power. They haven't agreed, as far as I'm aware, to any end to funding of proxies, and they're still firing off missiles and apparently have a big ballistic missile capability remaining. So that clearly is still something they have. And the Strait of Hormuz remains closed with all the global economic mayhem that is causing. I'm not entirely sure this constitutes all done in 6 weeks or a geopolitical masterstroke. Why are you under that impression?
Well, at the time, Trump had a negotiated agreement, I think, with the Ghalibaf clique, but they got removed in a counter coup by the IRGC, and the IRGC wanted to fight on a little longer. And so now they're dealing with one of the most punishing blockades in naval history. It's costing them something like $400 million a day and is really risking probably within the week, almost irreversible damage to their oil wells because they simply don't have a place to store all their oil. So the idea that we have to remove this blockade because oil prices are high right now is absurd. Whatever damage the United States would suffer from this, which is actually not really that big, honestly, because we are the world's biggest oil producer, the world's biggest oil exporter. When oil prices go up, there's a lot of Americans that benefit too. So, but Iran, almost all of their oil export needs to go through the Strait of Hormuz. They don't have any ability to meaningfully transit it outside of it. Moreover, they're a one-note economy. They're basically another oil-producing economy. We have the ability to completely squeeze them. And the idea that they can survive this I'd be shocked if they could survive it for another month, let alone 6. I think they're in really, really rough shape.
The problem, Will,
we have all the military capability. They have none. We're
right.
in great shape right now.
No, I know. Yeah, the problem is we keep hearing it's all about to end. It was going to be 2 to 3 weeks, then it's going to be 6 weeks. Now it's like, well, it could be months. Maybe years.
The enemy gets a say. It's the Black Knight in Monty Python. Like the enemy gets a say.
Well, exactly.
Like if they decide they don't want to surrender, they just eventually they get squeezed out and regime changed by rising up of their own people. But like you have, as long as they hold on to some power.
Let me finish my point.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure. You've just made my point for me, which is that is exactly what's happening. The enemy is having its say. We saw the same pattern in Vietnam, the same pattern in Iraq. And this is the one thing Donald Trump always said he wouldn't do. He wouldn't drag America into pointless, expensive Middle Eastern wars again. He has, with the biggest possible opponent.
This is far from pointless.
And he wasn't going to have a never-ending. Well, it's pointless if you don't end up with the enriched uranium and you don't end up with any absolute pledge not to build a nuclear weapon. And there's no sign of them doing either of those things. So let me bring in Buckley Carson. Buckley, great to have you on Uncensored. I've interviewed your brother Tucker many times. Never had the pleasure of you on the show, so it's great to have you. And I watched your interview together the other day where Tucker, of course, made a lot of news with his apology for supporting Trump and specifically because of what's happened with Iran. What do you feel when you hear you've got Will Chamberlain there absolutely buying into all this narrative that this Iran war is going great, the Iranians are just about to capitulate?
You guys are promulgating a narrative too.
American Israel.
Like narratives going both ways. Like I hear an Iranian narrative coming from
My narrative is only based on what I see with my own eyes, which is the Strait of Hormuz remains shut. It remains shut. And that was the thing that was the massive miscalculation, which is all the Iranians had to do was shut down the Strait of Hormuz and attack their neighboring Gulf states, and they could cause total mayhem. And that has been the thing which I don't think was properly calculated. But Buckley, what is your view about what it is? And how do you think people like Will Chamberlain have got themselves into a position where they are seeing one set of affairs here, of circumstance, which a lot of other people simply aren't seeing?
Well, I think it underscores the cartoonish posturing and declaring victory 10, 11, maybe 30 times actually has no bearing on the facts. And it's consistent with what Donald Trump has done in the last 16 years, which is completely betray not just his voters, but also Americans in general, and squandered American power that he was actually wielding on our behalf. It's not his to wield alone. He does so with our consent, our vote, and Americans have been consistent over the last decade that this was going to be a bad idea. Now, how they couldn't have anticipated that the Strait of Hormuz, which has been geographically located where it has been since the beginning of time, and in Persian control and Iranian control for the last long time, why did they think that they could control it? And ignoring that as a basic fact is, to use Will Chamberlain's words himself, obscene and absurd. Um,
Well, that's just incoherent because it's totally false. Obviously, the Navy had a plan for this, which is why they had a counter blockade ready. Moreover, the idea that Trump didn't campaign on preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon is ridiculous. There's like minutes of public clips of him saying over and over and over again, Iran can not have a nuclear weapon. And that's why Republicans are behind him. The latest polling still shows something like 80% of Republicans approve of Donald Trump's handling of Iran. Like the idea that he's betraying his base, it's just not borne out.
Most Americans.
no, it's
But
totally.
most Americans, for the first, well, I was going to say, Buckley, for the first time ever, a majority of Americans from the start of this have not supported this war. And 1 in 4 Republicans, actually, I've seen in some of the polling, have grown to be opposed to it because they don't understand how this plays out and ends. So we are into very uncharted territory. Donald Trump's personal approval rating has hit record lows now this week because of this. And so I think that there's a kind of there's an asymmetric war going on, and there's also an asymmetric opinion war going on the conservative right in America, which is fascinating to watch as well. Buckley, what did you think when Tucker said to you that he felt genuinely sorry and remorseful that he had so fully endorsed Trump, and that had he known what he was going to do with Iran, he wouldn't have done. And I know from interviewing him quite recently that he, repeatedly tried to stop Donald Trump doing this. What did you feel when you heard your brother say that, given how influential he is on the conservative right?
I thought it was an admirable expression of Christian principles to apologize when you've done something wrong. He had a huge impact. He worked hard on behalf of Donald Trump, as so many have. And what did they get met with but contempt and disdain from Donald Trump? Does Tucker bear responsibility? Do all the other people who worked for Trump, worked on behalf of Trump, bear responsibility? I think so, in varying degrees. Obviously, it's binary, as every election is, and I think we probably would have ended up in exactly the same situation if we'd elected Kamala Harris and all of her absurdity. But people who've defended Trump for the last decade aggressively at great expense to their own personal safety, their comfort, their employment, their friendships. Sure, I don't see it enough. To answer your question more clearly, you don't see it in America at all. You don't see it among American leaders. You never hear someone say, gosh, I'm sorry for actually being a proponent of this person or this policy that didn't work out, when it's obvious it hasn't. So I wish more people would adopt that attitude, frankly.
Dave Smith, there's another way of looking at this, which is that if it does take 6 months or a year, then in warfare terms, that still would remain a reasonably short amount of time. And if the upshot of it is that the regime does get toppled and the people do get their country back and the enriched uranium does get handed over, and there's a lot of big ifs in this sentence. But if all these things do end up happening and the Strait of Hormuz reopens, but the Iranians don't have control over it and the IRGC gets pretty well dismantled, if that was to all happen in a year's time, would the world owe Trump an apology and say that with hindsight, he showed the courage that no American president has shown in 47 years and he should win awards for it? I mean, is there a set of circumstances where that happens?
So are you asking me if there's a chance that Tucker Carlson will be apologizing for apologizing and then he'll have to support? Yeah, I mean, if for the record, let me say, I apologized for supporting Donald Trump and said I regretted it back last summer, and it did not make nearly as much news. So I would like to point that out. I mean,
you support him for like a
quick
month,
to this game.
So it's really not that big of a reversal.
It was a good 6 months he had me going there. Yeah, that's about it. But yeah, by the way, I'm embarrassed for the 6 months. I'm quite proud of the time before then, if anything. But no, I will say this. Look, Pierce, I mean, if these 7 things that all seem crazy unlikely right now all were to happen, so you got a lot there. We extracted the enriched uranium. We got this strait back open. This regime has fallen, and something not catastrophically worse than it has replaced it, as has been the case in every other regime change in the last 25 years in this region. If all of that happened, Pierce, all of it, probably at this point, a year from now, we'd go, wait, how much did the whole thing cost? How many innocent people got killed in the whole thing? And what did we really get out of this? You're saying we took the nuclear threat, which you claimed had been obliterated 6 months before you launched this war, off the table. And honestly, I mean, if it, at the very minimum at this point right now, Pierce, if you got this thing going for another year, you're going to be looking at what? few $100 billion of a cost. If you added up the cost right now, we might be at a few $100 billion. Our bases destroyed in the region. How many more retaliations from Iran? I mean, look, there's so many questions there, but the bottom line is that where we're at right now, it seems the only way to achieve any of these war goals are this wild bet on intimidating the Iranians into capitulating. But Will already kind of gave and you jumped on it rightfully, Pierce. Will gave the whole game away when he said the enemy gets a say too. That's right. So he can predict all this stuff. Like a couple weeks ago, he's saying we're going to have the enriched uranium. Nope, that turns out that deal isn't real because the enemy. Well, okay, but it didn't turn out now. Yeah. Now you're saying maybe they have. Okay, you just said Iran, you'd be surprised if they have a month left. In a month, when this government is still standing, you will move the goalpost to something else. This is what you guys do through all of these wars. They did it for 20 years in Afghanistan. The government that we're building up is doing great.
This is why this whole
I know, that's why I'm saying you can keep it going. I didn't say it's a quagmire. My point is that your bet, listen, I made this point over and over about the 12-day war, and I got ridiculed for it. When I said, look, the reason why that was such a risky thing that we shouldn't have done is because the enemy gets a say too. Exactly your point. Now, in that war, Iran chose to make sure they didn't kill any Americans, make sure that it wasn't something that was going to escalate the war. And I said, wow, we put a lot of faith in this crazy government to do that.
Yeah, you said they had escalation dominance over us, which is insane. They don't.
Will, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Our bases are destroyed. We're in a gridlock right now.
We don't get our oil from the Strait of Hormuz. They lost their entire senior leadership class.
What about our friends who do? What about the friends in the region that we completely left behind?
The friends are on our side now.
Okay, let me just
left OPEC. They're going to be aligned with us. You guys are just your guys are talking points. You're 10 years old.
Let's go. No, they're not. Well, let's go one at a time so we don't just talk over each other. And I'll listen to you too. But listen. I think it's a very arrogant and simplistic view to go, hey, if the Strait of Hormuz has had the lowest level of ships going through it in the last week, to just go, whatever, that's bad for the global economy. That 20% of the oil is like held up. You're like, dude, you do not know how bad this is going to be. Have people go, everyone at home who has a 401k, go look through all those companies that you own. You know how many of them are in foreign countries? Countries in Asia, in Europe are panicking right now over this oil situation. The Gulf states are panicking right now. And Pierce, this won't show up in the markets. If you remember, during COVID, during lockdowns, the stock market went to record highs after we were pouring trillions of dollars into the economy. It wasn't for a full another year when the price inflation started destroying Americans left and right. And we have no idea what's coming down the road. We do not know how long we can keep this up before it'll be a cataclysm for the global economy. And you're way too cocky about this, dude. You don't know this will be good for us.
You're way too conservative.
Will Chamberlain, hang on. Let me ask Will a question. We've got a slight delay between me and you guys, so you have to bear with me because I'm about half a second behind you. Will, the reality is this, isn't it? If I presented a set of circumstances to you where Donald Trump comes in for his second term in office, hits the ground spectacularly well, shuts down the southern border, pretty much stops all illegal immigration coming over that border, off to a flying start. Then a few things start to happen. Then a lot of stuff starts to happen. And now here we are, a year and a bit afterwards, so nearly 18 months now into his second term. His approval rating is at a record low. He's trapped in a Middle Eastern war of the kind he said he wouldn't get involved with. Cost of living is now increasing again in the United States. And in fact, inflation has not been eradicated. So it was going up anyway, but it's now going to be eradicated at a greater rate because of this, enhanced, I should say, inflation because of this, that we're going to see the consequence of, for example, the lack of fertilizer coming through is going to have an obvious effect on the global food market, including in the United States. So yes, it's true the United States is pretty well oil self-sufficient, but there are so many other parts of the world which are absolutely reliant on the Strait of Hormuz being open for gas, for oil, for fertilizer and so on. The longer this goes on, and the Iranian regime's only objective is to survive, the longer this goes on, the worse it gets for the United States and the global economy. And to anyone who pretends otherwise, and for Donald Trump's approval ratings, and for the Republicans' chances of hanging on to either a half of Congress in November, and I think that the longer this goes on now, we're nearly into May, then June, July, August. I mean, you're into the midterms before you know it. This becomes politically and economically unbelievably damaging for Donald Trump. You must see that. Sorry, Will, I can't hear you. Can you?
Yeah,
You on
I think
mute?
you
There
got
we are,
muted, Will.
I lost my mic for a second. Sorry. If
You seem
I
to have
agree with your
self-muted, which is a new phenomenon.
No, I just randomly hit my cord. I agree with your basic statement. The idea that if this war is still going and nothing has changed in 6 months, and this is the status quo in November, you're right. It will not be good for the midterms. It will not be good for the president. I just think the odds of that are incredibly, incredibly small. Again, the war has only been going on for 2 months. The blockade's been in place for less than 2 weeks, roughly 2 weeks. Which is roughly around the time, analysts that I were seeing, around 2 weeks is when the oil storage wells start to fill up. And, again, we're seeing these interesting mixed signals from the Iranian regime. Remember, it was only like a week and a half ago when you brought up that post I made, when Zayed Aragchi went on Twitter and said the Straits of Hormuz are open. And then immediately that got swept aside because there's an IRGC counter-coup. Like there's a lot has happened in the last 2 months, and it's happened very rapidly. And there's a lot of uncertainty about, especially inside Iran. And so whatever you guys talk about, this is sort of what I meant when I was saying conservatism. It's whatever you guys talk about, we don't know the broader impacts on the whole global economy of 20% bump in oil prices. Like, how can you not see that the effects on Iran of the Strait of Hormuz are much more dramatic when they lose the entirety of their ability to export oil, and it's their entire economy?
Wait, but Will, I think I'm glad you asked that question, because I think this kind of gets at the heart of it, because it's not a question of, well, if we're damaging ourselves, but we're damaging them more, therefore that's good. Like we have the military capability to blow up the entire world many times over. But if we were to do that, we wouldn't say, hey, that was a military victory because we blew a bunch of stuff up. The point is that we're no closer to any of the war aims than we were at the beginning. And now we have a whole new problem that we didn't even have back then. And by the way, those problems weren't nearly enough to launch a war of aggression over. The whole thing is madness. And you can sit here and try to spin it however you want to, but the bottom line is that the commander-in-chief who you're supporting here has declared victory, as Buckley put it, multiple times already, declared the thing over, made all types of threats that he's not even following through on, threatening war crimes and terrorism, and then just backing off of that, the whole time lying through his teeth to the American people. The regime has not fallen. It is a war. The strait is not going to open by itself. And meanwhile, we're no closer to getting their enriched uranium. We're no closer to getting them to stop supporting Hezbollah. In fact, Donald Trump, look, yes, it is, dude. In fact, Donald Trump had to even start warning the Israelis to stop because he was so concerned that was going to blow up this ceasefire and he needed to take a break from the military action. The bottom line here, Pierce, as you've covered very well on this show, is that somehow Donald Trump allowed Benjamin Netanyahu to con him into this war, which he has openly been spending my entire life trying to drag my country into, lying through his teeth about how they're weeks away from a nuclear weapon for 40 years. And somehow him and the Mossad chief were able to convince Donald Trump of this ridiculous notion that it was a slam dunk that you could get a regime change through the sky and that the regime
he
would
wasn't
be
convinced
overthrown
of that.
so quickly.
You didn't even read the New York
have...
Times article. That's just flat out false. Like you're just,
no,
you didn't read it.
Yes, I did read the article.
Yeah, apparently not, because it made very clear that the Americans did not credit Netanyahu
and he did it anyway.
Statements
and
about
he did it anyway.
Yeah, because he thought it was on his own. He wasn't
manipulated
into this by Netanyahu.
He called for the people to rise up. Listen, I mean, literally, the State Department themselves just admitted we fought this war for the Israelis. This is the most obvious. I just can't even believe you deny this.
I think what is obvious is it came out of Marco Rubio's mouth that was what had happened. He couldn't have been clearer until he
we literally
got
had a whole debate about this 3 weeks ago.
Hey, and then despite the
we watched the video that I quoted.
Let me bring. I want to bring Buckley back in, but I want to just first of all, Buckley. But before I come to you, I just want to ask Dave Smith about something that Mark Levin has said, because the reason I got you three guys on was because you all have a sort of different perspective about about Trump, the MAGA, conservative right, and so on. And Mark Levin's been leading the charge, obviously, for Trump and Iran and so on. And he's just called you out, Dave, personally, along with Tucker. So I'm calling out Tucker Carlson, Dave Smith, Nick Fuentes, and the other podcast reprobates, and drawing a clear line between strong political commentary and what I see as reckless rhetoric. You can be aggressive, you can be passionate, but when commentary fuels distortion, extremism, or confusion, it has real consequences. This is about responsibility in media, accountability in messaging, and protecting the integrity of real debate in America. Just before I go to Buckley, what is your response to Mark Levin?
I mean, Pierce, he literally goes off on this whole thing about how, like, hey, you can be pointed, but you got to be responsible about what you say. The video opens with him calling us the woke Reich. The video opens with him calling us Nazis as he in the same episode, Piers, advocates for tech censorship because we're all a bunch of Nazis. He's calling us woke and saying that our rhetoric is too far. I don't know. Honestly, as somebody who's read a lot of neoconservatives and war hawks over the years, and as someone who clearly is like opposes them politically, and there's been some pretty dumb arguments advanced by neocons before. None of them have ever gone full Mark Levin. He has become a complete clown, like a caricature of himself. If he wants to call out, he starts by going, "I'm calling out Dave Smith and Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes." How about come have a conversation with one of us? Let's discuss these issues. The bottom line is that Mark Levin is getting destroyed in the marketplace of ideas. And so now he refuses to debate anyone. Tucker has made the invite to him. He admitted this. Tucker texted him, reached out. Hey, it'd be good to lower the temperature. Why don't we have a real conversation here? We can talk about our disagreements. I've offered many times, but I'm sure Fuentes would too. You want to just sit here and smear people, and then when you're losing the argument, call for censorship. I'm sorry. I'm advocating for free speech and against a war, Piers. That was a lot like the Nazis, right? That makes me a Nazi for not wanting to fight a war of aggression and not wanting censorship. Like, how upside down is this whole world where you could accuse someone else of being a fascist as you support the most fascistic policies that are available to you every opportunity?
Well, yeah, and also I think, look, with all due respect, well, Buckley, I'll come to you. I mean, all due respect to Mark Levin, I mean, his own rhetoric can be highly incendiary, as he knows. Buckley, in your chat with Tucker, you talked about what you saw as the erosion of traditional conservative values in favour of MAGA populism. Do you think we're seeing the beginning of a move back to a more traditional conservatism? And if so, who would spearhead that in the next general election? Could it be your brother, for example? I put it to him directly, and he kind of gave a slightly obtuse response. And I wouldn't ask you to speak for him, but do you think he could, as his brother, do you think he could be the person that can perhaps steer the Conservative right to a different place?
Well, I think he articulates it well and consistently and compellingly. But before we talk about that, can I just say, can we just lay to rest all the lying about how we got into this war and who influenced us? Please, Will. Yes, we all read the New York Times piece, but we all saw Marco Rubio actually say on camera that we did it as a response because Israel was going to do it.
That was the reason for the timing of the strike. We literally had this discussion.
Everybody lied about it. Everybody has lied about it subsequently. And then the general counsel or a legal counsel at the State Department published a memo that declared that unequivocally. So it's on record. I think we should probably stop lying about it now. I think
again, that was about the timing, and moreover, like, it's the Gulf allies who want this too. In particular, that's like, if any, it's like the biggest driver of this. Honestly, MBS and MBZ, both of whom realize that if we leave and if we aren't willing to stand up to Iran, then they're going to be left at the mercy of the Iranians, and they're incredibly important allies.
Netanyahu's never been pushing for a war.
Netanyahu's very important influence too in this front, but so are these other guys. There's a reason, like, President Trump is constantly doing all this diplomacy with Arab countries, and a reason they're coming over to our side. Again, remember, like, the UAE just left OPEC, groundbreaking moment, really completely breaking the sort of resistance axis using oil against us. This is yet another example of how things, I think, you guys are blackpilling so much about the Straits of Hormuz and oil, like a remarkable event. That means the UAE can massively expand its own oil production. So, you guys have a remarkably simplistic view of these things. But President Trump is his own man. He's not some idiot. That New York Times article demonstrated it. And he went to war because he believed it was necessary to do this, because left unmolested, Iran would endlessly continue their nuclear pursuit. And it didn't matter how many demonstrations of like military capability.
Yeah, but I think hang on. Don't all talk at once, please. I'll come back to you, Buckley. I'll come back to you. I mean, the point I would make to that, Will, is that may well be true. Okay, I think he is his own man, and he obviously felt the moment was right. However, I think that Israel, through Netanyahu in the White House Situation Room and with the head of Mossad joining them remotely, painted a scenario to President Trump that if they took out the Ayatollah when they had this opportunity to do so, and the top leadership, that the IRGC would collapse from within, the people would rise up, there would be regime change, and everyone would be far too distracted to worry about the Strait of Hormuz. None of the rest of it happened. So it may well be that Donald Trump, for the best of intentions, having talked about this for many decades, genuinely felt this was a chance for all that to happen, because the Israelis, through their intelligence, the Mossad, the finest intelligence agency in the world by their own statements, that they painted a picture to him which he felt would happen, and it simply hasn't materialized. And I think that may well be the reality. Buckley, just coming back to my point about where this all leaves the conservative right, because it is fascinating to watch the American conservative right kind of eat itself alive a bit, where you've got your brother, you've got Megyn Kelly, you've got Candace Owens, you've got all these people lining up to attack a Republican president over going to war against Iran, and you've got people like Mark Levin and others on the other side staunchly supporting him. There's a real schism now in the conservative right. How does this play out, do you think?
Well, I think you define it well when those are the borders. And on the one side, you've got people who were stalwart, not fans of Donald Trump, but fans of his program that he articulated so well and strongly and in the face of just overwhelming and murderous opposition over the past decade. And then you've got people, sham frauds like Mark Levin and others, Ben Shapiro, who didn't support Trump, didn't support the populist agenda, didn't support the program, were disdainful of him and the America First ideals. So yeah, I think in the future, I would say there are a lot of people who are interested in having a Republican Party, or at least a party that gets back to the principles that say, let's operate on behalf of America and Americans first and foremost. Pretty easy to do, pretty easy to make America great again if you stick to those principles. It's a shame that Donald Trump hasn't. I just want to say two other things. I disagree that Donald Trump wanted to do this, not only because he articulated it so many times and so aggressively and pushed back against the John Boltons and others during the first term, but I'm certain that right up until the moment that we attacked Iran in this non-war war that we're involved in, he didn't want to. He was resistant to it. He understood that Americans were not on board. He understood Americans and his voters were absolutely opposed to it. And he understood that not only would it be bad for us and American power, he understood it would be bad for our allies, but more importantly, for his own political agenda.
You're suggesting about Donald Trump was blackmailed? Just say it. You don't have to like.
Those are your words. Well, I'm not suggesting that he's being blackmailed.
Well, what are you saying then? Or are you just making
I'll say very
big
clearly,
accusations
he's
and
obviously been
insinuations?
pressured. We don't have to speculate where that pressure is coming from, because we were just talking about.
Just say what you mean. Stop being a coward. Say what you mean. Stop being a coward. Say what you mean.
Interrupt me. I'm not being a coward. He was pressured by Israel and others around him on behalf of Israel.
And so he couldn't say no to them? Why not?
I beg your pardon?
Why couldn't he say no to them? What's your theory?
That's you can speculate about the kind of pressure he's been
How about you
under.
speculate? You're the one who's proffering the theory.
It's not a theory, it's fact. It's already been said.
Oh, that he's being blackmailed, that he couldn't say no to
Iran.
Iran.
Well,
That's your
seems-
theory.
You're asking him to speculate and then criticizing him for speculating. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I don't know.
My point is that it's nonsense. He's the
enough.
president of the United States and a billionaire real estate magnate. This is just Russiagate recircled. The idea that you guys, pretending to be such great models
Right. I like that.
are rehashing the
Russiagate
Democratic
recircled,
playbook of 2016 is just like so telling.
No,
Guess what?
it's
The
not.
MAGA was
I
never
don't
about
know. I don't know.
Iran have nukes.
People who undermined America for
Yes,
the
if
greater
Don- you know
part of
what?
Trump's first term.
Israel's just taking the place of Russia, but it's a 10-year-old theory.
Can I
That's
just
all
say
it
this?
is.
Can I say this? Will, can I
Just doing Russiagate. It's Israel game
Buckley,
now.
if you don't mind.
All right, don't all talk
if you're
at
gonna
once.
say-
Don't all talk
Okay,
at once,
look,
please. Let me bring in Dave Smith. I just want to say, Dave Smith, on this one point about what happens next. So Polymarket have the current prediction odds of J.D. Vance being the next leader of the Republicans as the nominee, 39%. Marco Rubio at 22%. Tucker Carlson is currently at third place on 6%. I heard Scott Galloway in his podcast yesterday painting a picture where he believes that Tucker is absolutely preparing to run for president, and that with his enormous online following, plus his mainstream media following from when he was the #1 rated guy at Fox and so on, and his sort of more traditional Christian conservative right credentials, and the fact that he, many people think he's more aligned to what Trump promised to be but hasn't turned out to be, that actually Tucker might end up being the nominee. Could you see that happening?
Oh, I mean, well, if you're asking on inside information to Tucker, I am the closest to him on the panel. I would say that but I don't particularly, I don't think Tucker's going to run is the impression I got. I would love that if he did. He would have my full support, no question about that. I think that there is this, this delusional attempt, which I'm not sure. You never know with Donald Trump because he says everything. You don't know exactly what's in his head. But he has mentioned like at least 4 times that CNN poll that had him at 100% of MAGA Republicans or something like that. But the reality is, as you already mentioned, Pierce, he is. Look, Donald Trump is about as popular as George W. Bush was after 2 disastrous wars and destroying the economy. He is conducting a war of choice that is the most unpopular war in American history. And again, Pierce, to my point, we haven't really seen what happens with this now. Now, I really think the best case scenario is that Donald Trump just stops. He does just let someone else figure out how to open up this strait. We end the blockade, we come home, we quit doing it, and we tell Israel we're not going to support them doing any more of it either. I think that's the best case scenario. But even if that happens, I still think Donald Trump is going to go even further down in the poll. So in other words, the point I'm getting to is that I don't think Rubio or Vance or anyone attached to this administration has a shot at being the next nominee. I think if things continue on as they are right now, it's going to have to be somebody outside of this administration, with the exception of maybe Joe Kent or someone like who resigned in disgust when it was happening. And I just want to say,
it's libertarian fantasy land. Libertarian fantasy land.
Sure. We'll see. Well, he's already
we can make a bet at
rating
some
around
point
George W. Bush. Sure. Absolutely. He's about as popular as George W. Bush was. Okay. Anyway, so by the way, to Will's comment that this is just like Russiagate, like if you say Israel has influence over Donald Trump, that's the exact same thing as saying that he was in a conspiracy with the Russians to overturn the election in 2016. Something, by the way, that I have a great track record on.
Russia blackmailed Trump. Do you not remember the P-tape allegations?
Yes, but again, Will, instead of interrupting what I say, I know, but if you just let me finish my point, that wouldn't really work here. See the difference, and this is someone who every single day called out Russiagate for the hoax that it was, the deep state attempted coup of a democratically elected president. Every day on my show, I called that out through all of Russiagate. And yeah, you know what, Will? If Donald Trump had said, hey, these Russians who care about Russia more than anything else have given me hundreds of millions of dollars. And every day they come to the White House and they lobby me to do stuff on behalf of Russia. And I always say yes, I always do it. Yeah, Russiagate would have had some more legs to it. If there was an entire Russia lobby in this country who had been pushing for a war of aggression for 30 years and then Donald Trump launched it, yeah, Russiagate would have some more legs on it. I'm sorry, man. Just saying that there is foreign influence somewhere doesn't mean
dominated the national conversation for 3 years. You must have amnesia.
Yes,
no, what you guys are doing is extraordinarily similar.
This is such, all right. This is so
I
think the difference.
Trump is being
hang on, time out.
Again. Yeah,
time out. I think the difference. The difference is in Russiagate we didn't have.
Neither did Buckley.
In Russiagate we didn't have. Wait a minute. In Russiagate we didn't have the Republican Secretary of State confirming Russiagate to the world in the way that we had Marco Rubio. Let me end by asking. Let me end by. I've got to wrap it up. Let me end by asking Buckley the question I want to ask you, but in a slightly different way. Is are you 100% certain that Tucker won't run for president in 2028?
I'm not 100% certain of anything. I don't have control over this or much else. So
he's saying there's a chance.
Would you like him? Would you like him to, Buckley?
Pardon?
Would you like him to run for president?
Not especially. I'd certainly like him to help articulate exactly what the next president should be focused on. I think he's capable of doing that probably better than really a few other people in public at the moment. But speaking of articulating things well, Dave Smith's point was excellent. And yes, I think Donald Trump should do the right thing and get the hell out of Iran and declare victory for the 37th time, and this time actually mean it. But maybe he could also apologize to America and his voters while he's doing it. Maybe he could actually come to Jesus. I know we're not supposed to say that in public anymore, but maybe he should. He could repent for the mistakes that he's made, and he could apologize.
Well, I think Russell Brand would certainly endorse that final point. Will Chamberlain, just finally, are you prepared in 6 months' time if the Iran war is dragged on and it costs Republicans both halves of Congress? Are you prepared to make a public apology on Uncensored for being so resolute in your conviction it was all going to end brilliantly?
I won't make an apology because I don't make public apologies. I actually have to wrong someone to make an apology. I think apologies need to be private, but I will come on and concede error. How about that? Is that sufficient?
I'll take it. I'll take that. That would be intellectually honest of you.